I was inspecting a general's office when the foundations of my beliefs, discipline, duty, and professional distance, crumbled in an instant. Morning light streamed across his mahogany desk, highlighting the metallic gleam of polished brass nameplates. I was midway through a routine base inspection, strictly business, when my eyes snagged on a photograph. It was a picture of a little girl, around 6 years old, with brown curls and blue eyes so bright they seemed almost familiar. The world seemed to hush around me. I froze, recognizing that face. The inspection folder slipped from my grasp, scattering papers across the carpet. My throat constricted as I moved closer. The silver frame was engraved with a single word: Emily. The girl was smiling, clutching a small stuffed marine bear. My pulse hammered so hard it drowned out the ticking of the wall clock. "Something wrong, Major Collins?" The general's voice cut through the air, sharp but laced with caution. I swallowed hard and turned to face him. "Sir, this girl. This child in the photo." I pointed towards the desk, my hand trembling despite years of training. He stepped forward, initially curious, then his posture tightened. "What about her?" She lived with me at St. Mary's Orphanage in Waco, Texas." His eyes widened, all color draining from his face. His lips parted, trembling before he could speak. "You mean, my missing daughter?" He looked at me as if I had conjured a ghost into the room. I was at a loss for words. As a Marine, I was trained to confront chaos, not heartbreak. Yet, the silence between us felt heavier than any battlefield I had ever crossed. That morning had started like any other. Coffee at 0600, uniform meticulously pressed, inspection orders neatly folded in my breast pocket. I was assigned to Fort Hood for a 3-month internal audit, a new department each week, a new report every Friday. Professional distance was the golden rule. Keep emotion out of the job. There was a pause. "You're talking about a ghost program. Then tell me how to find a ghost." "Carefully," she said, and quietly. "I'll run your memo through an old clearance pathway. But if you're right about Vance, you could be putting a target on your back." I've had worse. After the call, I sat there listening to the rain. I should have felt fear, but instead, I felt calm, focused, the same stillness I used to feel before stepping into a combat zone. Only this time, the enemy wasn't across a desert. He was behind a desk. The next morning, I met General Alden again. He looked different, tired, but steadier. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Resolve. I handed him the flash drive. "Sir, this is the memo that links Matthews to Vance." He plugged it into his laptop, scrolled through the scanned image, and went pale. "Authorization code hexops." He used an operational seal that was shut. He slumped back, rubbing his temples, a gesture of weariness. He buried it back in 2004. That means he resurrected a defunct program under a false pretense. No oversight, no one to answer to. You grasp the magnitude of this, don't you? If this ever surfaces, it'll send shockwaves through half of Washington. "With all due respect, sir," I replied softly, "Washington is the least of my concerns. Emily is what matters to me." He glanced at me, a faint glimmer of pride momentarily piercing through his exhaustion. "You echo her mother's sentiments." He rose and walked to the window, gazing out. "You've already done more than enough. Allow me to handle things from here." I shook my head, disagreeing with his assessment. "Sir, you can't shoulder this burden alone. Whoever orchestrated this cover-up still wields considerable power. We need tangible evidence, proof that she was transferred, not simply vanished." He turned, his voice dropping to a low but intense register. "What exactly are you implying?" Ramos drew his weapon, motioning for me to stand back. We entered cautiously, our senses on high alert. The house reeked of stale bourbon and old smoke, a testament to a life spiraling out of control. A lamp lay knocked over on the floor, its shade askew. A picture frame had shattered, scattering shards of glass across the carpet. Matthews was slumped in his chair, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. A bottle lay clutched in his hand, its contents long gone. An empty pill container rested on the table beside him, its label facing down. I knelt beside him, my fingers searching for a pulse. Nothing. Ramos swore softly under his breath, his expression grim. Suicide. Maybe, I replied, my mind racing. But look at this. Pinned to Matthews's shirt pocket was a note, hastily scrawled in shaky handwriting. For words that spoke volumes. I tried to warn you. At the precinct, Ramos's contacts processed the scene, gathering evidence and piecing together the events that had led to this tragic end. The official story would likely be an overdose, a life consumed by regret and despair. But both of us knew better. Someone had silenced Matthews, ensuring that his secrets would remain buried. I left Houston that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. Matthews's death had changed everything. Now, it wasn't just about a missing girl. It was about protecting a dangerous secret, about silencing anyone who dared to get too close to the truth. When I arrived back at Fort Hood, I drove straight to the general's quarters, bypassing the usual protocols. The guard at the gate recognized me and let me through without question. I found him sitting in his study, still in uniform, his tie loosened. The same haunted look lingered in his eyes, reflecting the burden he had carried for so long. Matthews is dead, I said quietly, delivering the devastating news. He froze, the glass of whiskey halfway to his lips. How? Pills. But life rarely respects such rules for long. General Robert Alden was a legend throughout the Corps, a man of impeccable posture and precise diction, the kind of leader who could command silence simply by entering a room. I had admired him from afar during my cadet years. Now I stood in his office, shaking like a raw recruit. He gestured for me to sit. Tell me exactly what you mean, Major. I took a breath. Sir, that girl. Emily. You said her name is Emily? When I knew her, she was called Lily. We grew up together in St. Mary's Orphanage in Waco. She was about my age, maybe a little younger. She arrived when we were 6 years old. The general's jaw clenched. How can that be possible? Emily was taken from a park in Dallas 20 years ago. She was 4. I met his gaze. Then she must have been found, sir. Found and renamed. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The office clock ticked on, steady and unwavering. Finally, the general walked to the window, his reflection barely visible against the bright Texas sunlight. I searched for years, he said quietly. Private investigators, military contacts, even federal channels. They found nothing. My wife died believing she was dead. He turned to me, his eyes moist but steady. And now you tell me she lived. I nodded slowly. I can't be certain, sir, but those eyes. I'd stake my life on it. He exhaled hard, steadying himself. Tell me about her. What do you remember? So I told him about Lily's soft voice, her quiet laughter, her habit of tracing airplane shapes in the dust on the dormitory windows, how she would hum old hymns when the younger kids cried at night, and how she had a tiny crescent-shaped birthmark near her neck. When I mentioned the birthmark, his hand flew to his chest as if struck. Emily had the same mark. The general sank heavily into his chair, all his authority seemingly vanished. Major Collins, if you're right, if my daughter was alive all these years, then someone kept her from us. Permit me to speak with Matthews again, this time unofficially. He hesitated, weighing the risks. If you press him too hard, he'll likely resist even more. I'm a Marine, sir. I'm accustomed to handling pressure. 2 nights later, I found myself driving back to Georgetown. The neighborhood exuded tranquility, with porch lights casting a warm, timeless glow. I parked a block away, waiting for the street to clear before approaching Matthews's residence. When he opened the door, I detected a flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew precisely why I was there. Major Collins, he said, his voice raspy. You should have stayed out of this. Too late, I retorted. I've already located the memo. He froze, realization washing over his face. Then you understand the implications. I understand that someone exploited your authority to conceal a kidnapping. He shook his head vehemently, denying any involvement. You don't comprehend the situation. That order wasn't mine. I was instructed to sign it or risk losing everything, my pension, my reputation. They claimed the girl was under federal protection, that her father's integrity was compromised. Her father was a Marine general, not a criminal. Matthews's composure crumbled, revealing the weight of his actions. I wasn't aware of that. I swear I didn't know. He sank into his chair, trembling uncontrollably. I believed I was assisting a child, not contributing to her disappearance. I retrieved my recorder and placed it on the table. Say that again, for the record. He stared at the blinking red light, his expression a mixture of resignation and despair. You believe a confession will change anything? Vance remains untouchable in D.C. It's the people like me, those who followed orders, who ultimately pay the price. Then help me hold him accountable. For a long moment, he remained motionless. Then, quietly, he nodded in agreement. You'll find what you're seeking in the Logistics Archives, Houston branch. But I believe it was staged. He left a note. Alden set the glass down with trembling hands, his face etched with pain. Vance, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sir, he knows we're getting close. I believe he sent someone to retrieve the files. You're not safe here. He offered a faint, weary smile, a hint of resignation in his eyes. Major, I stopped being safe 20 years ago. I retrieved the photo of Lily from my jacket and placed it on his desk, a tangible symbol of hope amidst the darkness. I found this in the Houston archive. There's proof of the relocation and Vance's signature. He stared at it for a long moment, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the image of his daughter. Then, he brought his hand to his face, covering his eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of the past. I heard a sound I had never heard from him before, a low, broken sob that tore at my heart. When he finally looked up, tears streamed down his weathered face. My God, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. She's alive. We can't be certain yet, I cautioned softly, but the trail is warm. He nodded slowly, composing himself and pulling himself back from the brink. Then we follow it. Where does it lead? Vance, I said simply, my voice unwavering. All the way to D.C. 2 days later, we landed at Andrews Air Force Base, our arrival cloaked under the guise of a logistics audit. The general wielded enough clearance to keep us off the radar, at least for now. But secrecy in Washington is a deceptive thing, like fog. It appears solid until you try to touch it, and then it dissipates, revealing the truth lurking beneath the surface. Captain Brooks met us outside the Pentagon, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. You two are insane, she said, pushing her sunglasses up onto her forehead. Do you realize what will happen if you accuse an undersecretary without concrete proof? I have proof, I countered, my voice firm. His tone hardened. And I intend to find out who. I hesitated. Sir, with respect, this might run deeper than either of us thinks. Adoption files, sealed transfers. It won't be easy. He looked up, his gaze intense. You're a Marine, aren't you? Yes, sir. Then we don't quit when something isn't easy. That simple, firm sentence ignited something within me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Not anger, exactly, but a sense of righteous determination. When I left his office, the sun felt hotter, the air thicker. I walked across the base, trying to steady my thoughts. My boots hit the pavement in perfect rhythm, but my mind replayed the photograph over and over. Could it really be her? Lily? The girl who had shared her half of a peanut butter sandwich when I was hungry, the one who had whispered, "Someday we'll both get out of here." I remembered the last time I saw her. We were 12. I was being adopted by a family in Dallas, promised a new start. She had hugged me tight, tears streaking her cheeks. Write to me, she had said. I promised I would. I never did. Duty had carried me far from that orphanage, from Texas to Okinawa to Quantico. But guilt travels faster than any deployment. Now, 2 decades later, her face had found me again, smiling from a frame in a general's office. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat in my quarters, staring at the faint reflection of the moon on my medals. They suddenly felt lighter, or perhaps emptier. I had always believed the Corps had taught me everything about loyalty and courage. But now I understood that some battles aren't fought for your country. They're fought for the truth. And sometimes that truth waits in silence for years, like a photograph on a desk, until someone dares to look closely enough to see what's been lost. The next morning, I opened my laptop, typed St. Mary's Orphanage, Waco, Texas, and pressed enter. The mission had begun. The following morning, I arrived at the base before sunrise. Box 47C. I can't grant you access, but you can gain entry on your own. You still wear the uniform. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table, revealing a key card. It's a single-use key. Don't return here after you use it. I stood, acknowledging his assistance. Thank you, Colonel. He didn't look up, consumed by his guilt. Don't thank me, Major. Pray that I never have to see that little girl's eyes in my sleep again. Outside, the rain had ceased. The moon pierced through the clouds like a sharp blade, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and the promise of redemption. As I settled behind the wheel, I held up the key card against the dashboard light, examining it closely. One use, one chance, and perhaps, just perhaps, one step closer to uncovering the truth. By the next morning, the Texas sky was clear and bright. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dust and wet cedar. I had barely slept, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, as I prepared to head for Houston. Before embarking, I felt compelled to see General Alden one last time. He deserved to know what I was about to face. When I entered his office, he was standing rigidly by the window, his gaze fixed on the parade field below. Sunlight illuminated the silver streaks in his hair, revealing his age. For a moment, he appeared less like a commanding officer and more like a concerned father awaiting news he dreaded to hear. Sir, I said softly, announcing my presence. He turned, his eyes revealing the toll the past weeks had taken on him. Collins, you look like you've been through a war. Perhaps I have. I placed the key card on his desk. Matthews provided me with this. It grants access to the logistics archives in Houston, Box 47C. He claims that's where the real records concerning Lily, or rather Emily, are located. Alden's jaw tightened, betraying his inner turmoil. He talked. He was scared, sir. He claimed the order wasn't his, that he signed it under duress. A signed authorization of death in 20 years of silence, she sighed, shaking her head. Then I hope you have more than that, because Vance has friends who can erase you before breakfast. We don't need his friends, the general interjected evenly, his gaze unwavering. We just need 5 minutes in his office. We got those 5 minutes, barely. Vance's office was immaculate, a carefully curated display of power and influence. A flag stood proudly behind his desk, and framed commendations adorned the walls, testaments to his distinguished career. The faint hum of power filled the air, a palpable presence that underscored his position. He looked up as we entered, recognition flickering briefly in his sharp gray eyes. Robert, he said smoothly, extending his hand in a perfunctory greeting. I was told you had retired. Not yet, Alden replied, his voice steely. I had a few loose ends to tie up. Vance's gaze shifted to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. And who is this? Major Sarah Collins, I replied evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. U.S. Marine Corps. I believe we've met, at least on paper. He offered a faint smile, his eyes betraying nothing. I doubt it. What can I do for you, Major? I slid the photo of Lily across his desk, the image a silent accusation. You can start by explaining this. His eyes flicked down, his composure unwavering. Pretty girl, he said, his tone casual. What about her? She was relocated under your directive. Code HVDX Ops. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a sardonic smile. That program was classified. You have no authority to access those files. I have all the authority I need, I retorted, my voice unwavering. She was a child, not a classified asset. Vance's jaw tightened, his patience wearing thin. You have no idea what you're meddling with. The world isn't black and white, Major. Sometimes we bury things for a reason. Then let's unbury them. I challenged. The air was heavy with the scent of wet asphalt, and the American flag above headquarters fluttered faintly in the breeze. I'd spent the night replaying every memory of Lily I could summon. The way she'd line up her crayons before coloring, her habit of humming when she was scared. I needed to be sure this wasn't some cruel trick of resemblance or wishful memory. When I walked into the general's office, he was already there, standing by the same window. He looked as if he hadn't slept either. His uniform was impeccable, but his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. "Major Collins," he said quietly. "Close the door." "I did, sir." He gestured towards a chair. "You said you knew my daughter as Lily. Tell me everything from the beginning." I sat down, hands folded in my lap as if I were back in front of a commanding officer at a disciplinary board. But this wasn't about discipline. This was about pain. "She came to the orphanage when I was 6. I began."
She didn't talk much at first.
The sisters said she'd been found near a gas station outside Waco. They didn't know where she came from. She didn't remember her last name. They called her Lily because she had a flower stitched onto her jacket. The general stared down at his clasped hands. "Emily loved lilies," he whispered. "She used to pick them for her mother every Sunday after church." That silence settled again, the kind that fills a room like fog. "She was the kindest kid there," I continued softly. "She'd fix other children's toys, share her food, stay up late to comfort the ones who cried at night. The staff said she'd been through something traumatic, but she smiled anyway. That's what I remember most. She smiled through everything." The general rubbed his temples. "I spent 20 years wondering if she was alive, and you're telling me she was smiling in an orphanage 3 hours away?" There was no accusation in his tone, only heartbreak. "I didn't know, sir. I swear, I didn't know who she really was." He nodded slowly. The general studied the card intently, his expression unreadable.
Duress.
From Harold Vance. It wasn't a question, but a confirmation of his long-held suspicions. "Yes, sir." Matthews admitted it. He nodded slowly, as if validating a suspicion that had haunted him for years. Vance always had influential friends, senators, defense contractors, lobbyists, the kind of men who believe loyalty is a commodity. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Sir, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but why would anyone target you? Why abduct your daughter?" He took a deep breath, composing himself before settling into his chair. "Have you ever made an enemy out of the wrong man, Major?" "Plenty, sir." He offered a small, humorless laugh. "Then you understand." He opened a drawer and retrieved a worn folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, photocopies, and a yellowed letter. He slid it toward me, indicating that I should read it. The letter was typed, bearing only the initials HV. "Step down from command, or your family will pay the price." I looked up, startled by the implications. "I received that the week before Emily disappeared," he revealed quietly. "At the time, I was overseeing an investigation into defense logistics contracts, specifically Vance's unit. I uncovered evidence of procurement fraud, millions in unaccounted funds. I intended to take it to the Inspector General." He stared past me toward the window, his eyes unfocused. 2 days later, she was gone. The police assumed it was a random act, a child abduction from a park, but I knew better. I set the letter down carefully, processing the information. "You suspect Vance retaliated?" "I don't suspect, Major," he stated firmly. "I know." The room fell silent, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioner. He continued, his voice now hushed with pain. "My wife, Claire, never forgave me. She blamed my career, my ambition. She believed that if I had left the Corps, we could have been a normal family." He stood abruptly, towering over his desk, his presence menacing. "You think you can threaten me? You'll be stripped of your commission before the week is out." The general rose to his feet, his voice low but filled with steel.
"Try it."
"But know this, Harold. If my daughter's name is anywhere in your files, I will drag you before Congress myself." For the first time, the carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath. A flash of fear, or perhaps guilt, flickered across Vance's face. "You can't prove anything." Alden offered a faint, knowing smile. That's the thing about men who hide behind secrets. Eventually, someone like her, he nodded toward me, shines a light. Vance's voice dropped to a venomous hiss. You don't know what you're starting. I met his gaze squarely, refusing to be intimidated. Yes, I do. I'm starting justice. We walked out before he could respond, leaving him standing there, seething with suppressed rage. Outside, the afternoon sun blazed across the marble steps of the Pentagon, bright enough to sting the eyes. The general stopped, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "He's cracking. He knows it's over." "Not yet, sir," I replied, my voice filled with determination. But soon. That night, back at the temporary quarters, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of Emily, of Matthews, of the powerful forces arrayed against us. My phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m., shattering the silence. A message from an unknown number. If you want to find the girl, go to Lake Charles, Louisiana. Ask for Lily Carter. Don't tell Alden. Don't tell anyone. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. It could be a trap, a carefully orchestrated attempt to lure me away from the general, or it could be the lead we had been desperately praying for. Either way, I was going. I left before dawn, driving south on the empty highway, the rising sun painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. Of course you didn't. You were a child. Then his eyes lifted to meet mine, sharp again, command restored. Do you still have any contact with the orphanage? I haven't been there since I joined the Marines, but I can go back. He exhaled deeply, a sound like surrender. Do it discreetly. No press, no official channels. If someone hit her, I don't trust the bureaucracy to tell me the truth. I hesitated. Sir, I'll need authorization. I'll take care of the paperwork, he interrupted. You take care of finding out what happened. I gave a short nod. Yes, sir. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old envelope.
He handed it to me.
Inside was a faded photograph of him, his late wife, and a little girl holding a toy airplane. Keep this, he said quietly, in case you need confirmation. I studied the photo. The child's eyes were unmistakable, blue-gray, with that same earnest spark. Lily's eyes. When I left the office, the base seemed quieter than usual, as if even the air was listening. The drive to Waco took 3 hours, but it felt like I was crossing 20 years. The road stretched endlessly through fields of rusted fences and parched soil. My reflection stared back at me from the windshield, a crisp uniform and shadowed eyes. Somewhere between Dallas and Waco, I stopped seeing Major Collins in the mirror. I saw Tessa, the orphan girl who once believed family was something you earned through good behavior. When I arrived, the orphanage looked smaller than I remembered. The red bricks were chipped, the sign faded. St. Mary's Home for Children. The gate creaked open as I pushed it. Inside, the hall smelled of floor wax and dust. The same long corridor, the same wooden cross above the entrance. A familiar voice greeted me. Well, I'll be. Sarah Collins? It was Sister Agnes, older now, her face lined, but her eyes still held that same kindness. She hugged me tightly. You've grown into such a fine woman, a Marine, no less. In a way, she was right. I buried myself in my work. When she passed away 5 years later, I buried myself even deeper. His hands trembled slightly as he poured a glass of water. I've carried that letter every day since, a constant reminder that some victories come at too high a cost. I swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. Sir, if Vance is responsible for this, he didn't just destroy your family, he corrupted the very institution he swore to uphold. He looked up sharply, his gaze piercing. And now you understand why I've remained silent. The Corps is built on honor, but honor cannot withstand scandal. If this information is revealed improperly, it will tear through the command structure like a wildfire. Careers will be ruined. Recruits will lose faith. Sir, with all due respect, I countered gently, the truth deserves to see the light of day, even if it burns. He studied me intently, then offered a faint smile. You remind me of Claire. She possessed that same unwavering spirit. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, lost in our own thoughts. Then he asked softly, "Do you believe Emily is still alive?" "Yes, sir. I've witnessed too many improbable events to believe otherwise." He nodded slowly, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. "Then find her, Collins. Not for my sake, but for hers. She deserves to know who stole her life from her." He stood, buttoned his uniform jacket, and extended his hand. I rose instinctively and saluted, but he shook his head. Instead, he reached across and gripped my shoulder firmly. "You've accomplished more for me in a week than a dozen investigators did in 20 years. I'm eternally grateful. Just doing my duty, sir." "Not just duty," he corrected, "something more." As I left headquarters, I paused at the memorial wall, a somber tribute to fallen Marines. I ran my hand over the names etched in stone, recalling faces I had known and those I hadn't. Lake Charles awaited, and with it, perhaps, the key to unlocking the truth. With the first hint of dawn nipping at my heels, I pressed on. I kept the details to myself, not breathing a word to the general or to Brooks and Ramos. The sender of that message had a disturbing knack for finding me, a clear sign that time was slipping away. As I crossed into Louisiana, the air thickened, heavy with humidity. The landscape transformed into a dreamscape of mist-shrouded pine bayous, their still waters mirroring the sunrise like panes of glass. It didn't feel like a journey into danger, but a pilgrimage towards something sacred, a rendezvous long overdue. The address led me to Moss Bluff, a quiet lakeside town, seemingly lost in time. I parked near the weathered dock, where the water gently lapped against the aged posts. Across the street stood a humble white house with a tilted mailbox. The name on it stopped me in my tracks. Carter. I walked up the path and knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a woman in her late 40s. Her eyes were weary, but her face was kind, framed by a faded floral robe. "Can I help you?" I hesitated for a moment. "Ma'am, I'm looking for someone named Lily Carter." Her grip tightened on the doorframe, her expression hardening.
"Who's asking?"
"My name is Major Sarah Collins, U.S. Marine Corps." I paused, then added, "I knew her when she was a little girl." Her face softened slightly, suspicion giving way to a flicker of curiosity. She opened the door wider. "Come in." The living room carried the scent of lemon polish and aged wood. Photographs adorned the walls, chronicling birthdays and holidays. One picture stood out, a smiling young woman with light brown curls and eyes the color of a stormy sky after the rain. Lily, a bit older now, perhaps 18 or 19, but undeniably the same child from the photo I carried in my pocket. "She's at work," the woman said quietly. "Community hospital just outside town." "Who are you to her?" "Still trying to earn my keep," I said with a smile. She looked at my uniform. "You're not here for an inspection, are you?" "No, sister. This is personal." Her expression shifted. "I thought so. You've got that look, like you're about to dig up ghosts." I told her about the general's photograph, about Lily. Her face softened, then saddened. "I remember her," she said quietly. "Sweet girl. Never caused trouble. Always drawing airplanes and flowers. She cried for her father every night at first. After a year, she stopped." My throat tightened. "What happened to her?" "She was transferred." That's what the paperwork said. "Houston Foster Care Program, 2006. A new family, supposedly, but we never got confirmation. Back then, records were unreliable." "Do you still have her file?" Sister Agnes nodded and disappeared down a hallway. When she returned, she was holding a dusty brown folder. "Not much left. We lost most of the files in the flood 10 years ago." Inside, I found a few photocopies, medical forms, vaccination records, and one faded photograph of Lily. On the back, written in the sister's neat hand, "Transferred by request of State Social Services, case ID 77HC. I snapped a photo with my phone. "Sister," I asked carefully, "who approved the transfer?" Her brows knitted together. "I don't remember the man's name. He wasn't one of ours. Military, maybe. He wore a badge, not a collar." I froze. Military?
Yes.
Said it was part of an emergency relocation after a hurricane. There was no hurricane in Texas that year, I whispered. Sister Agnes looked startled. Are you sure? I'm sure. For the first time, I felt a cold certainty crawl up my spine. Someone had used military credentials to move Lily and hide her. When I thanked the sister and walked outside, the late afternoon sun hit the building just right. The old bricks glowed amber, and for a second, I imagined Lily's laughter echoing through the courtyard again. But the echo was gone. Only the wind remained. Each name represented a story cut short, a life unfinished. Emily's story was not yet over. Back in my car, I reflected on Matthews's trembling hands, the forged directives, Alden's haunted expression. Power, pride, corruption. It all seemed so distant from the values we had sworn to defend. But then again, isn't that how betrayal always begins, slowly, insidiously, from within? That evening, I drove to the old base chapel. The door creaked open as I stepped inside, the silence amplifying my thoughts. Candles flickered near the altar, casting dancing shadows. I wasn't there to pray. I wasn't even sure I knew how anymore. I simply sought solace in the quiet stillness. The light from the stained glass windows painted the pews in hues of fractured blues and golds. I sat down, burying my face in my hands, overwhelmed by the weight of the task ahead. When I finally looked up, I noticed a small plaque near the front, dedicated to those who serve in truth. I smiled faintly, a flicker of hope igniting within me.
Truth.
That's what this was truly about. Not revenge, not blind obedience to orders, but simply the pursuit of truth. My phone buzzed, shattering the tranquility. A message from Captain Brooks at the Pentagon. Received your memo image. Verified clearance code. Vance's authorization is genuine, but the operation itself doesn't exist in any active record. You're chasing a black project. Proceed with caution. A black project. That explained everything and nothing. I texted back. If it doesn't exist, how do I find it? Her reply was instant. Find who wanted it erased. Follow the money. Always follow the money. I pocketed my phone and rose from the pew, renewed resolve hardening my gaze. Outside, the evening sun dipped low, bathing the base in a warm amber glow. It illuminated the chapel's stained glass, scattering vibrant colors across the floor. For a fleeting moment, it appeared as if the world was on fire. I took that as a sign. Someone who's been searching a long time, I replied. The woman, Mrs. Carter, sat down slowly. You're not the first. A man came by last year, said he was a lawyer from Washington. Asked questions about her adoption. She didn't want to talk to him. My throat tightened. Did he leave a name? No, but he scared her. I exhaled, trying to reassure her. Then I'll do my best not to. Mrs. Carter studied me intently for a long moment. You look like a woman who's seen too much and still hasn't stopped fighting. I've had practice, I said softly. She offered a faint smile. Then maybe it's good you came. Lily's different. Always has been. Nightmares when she was little. Couldn't remember her early years, said she dreamed about men in uniforms, about a big house with a flag outside. My chest tightened. She remembers. Mrs. Carter nodded. She doesn't know why. The hospital was a small, intimate place on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. I walked in and asked the receptionist for Lily Carter. She pointed me towards the physical therapy wing. When I saw her, my breath caught in my throat. She stood by the window, sunlight illuminating her hair, guiding an elderly veteran through balance exercises. Her voice was calm, steady, and professional, yet filled with warmth. As the session ended, I approached her slowly. Lily? She turned, curious. Yes? Up close, there was no denying it. The eyes, the delicate jawline, the same features from the portrait in the general's office. My name's Sarah Collins, I said quietly. I knew you once, when you were little. She tilted her head, uncertain. I'm sorry, I don't remember you. That's okay, I said. There's a lot you weren't supposed to remember. Something flickered behind her eyes, fear, or perhaps a glimmer of recognition. What do you mean? I reached into my jacket and handed her the photograph. The one from the Houston file. That's you. As I started my car, my phone buzzed. It was a message from General Alden. Keep me updated. I've reopened my daughter's case file. And Major, be careful who you talk to. Some ghosts wear uniforms. I looked at the orphanage in my rearview mirror and whispered, yes, sir. Because he was right. Some ghosts don't haunt cemeteries. They haunt paperwork. And I was about to wake them up. I drove away from Waco with the folder sitting on the passenger seat like a silent passenger. Every few miles, I glanced at it, the brown edges curling, the word confidential stamped in red ink across the top. I'd handled classified intelligence in combat zones, decrypted orders during blackouts, even read casualty lists that could break the hardest heart. But nothing felt heavier than that thin file. The highway stretched wide and endless under the Texas sun. Flat fields blurred into the horizon, and with every passing mile, I felt like I was driving deeper into my own past. When I joined the Marines, I promised myself I'd never look back. I buried St. Mary's, buried Tessa, buried every lonely night in that dormitory with its peeling paint and creaking beds. Duty gave me a new name, a new spine, a new life. But life has a way of dragging your history back into the light when you least expect it. By the time I reached my quarters at Fort Hood, it was nearly dusk. I didn't turn on the light. I just sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began typing in what little information I had. Case ID 77HC, Houston Foster Care Program, 2006. Nothing. No digital record. No archived file. It was as if Lily or Emily had vanished twice. I sent a message through a secure military channel to an old contact, Captain Elena Brooks, now working in the JAG office at the Pentagon. Need access to restricted relocation archives. 2006, code 77HC. Possible military involvement. Quiet request. Her reply came 5 minutes later. You realize this could be above your clearance level? Tomorrow, I would drive to Houston, use the key card, and open box 47C. Whatever lay inside would either set a family free or end my career for good. As I walked away, I caught my reflection in the chapel window, a woman in uniform, her eyes sharp, her jaw set with determination. Somewhere behind that reflection, the girl I used to be, the orphan named Tessa, was watching. She didn't look afraid anymore. She looked ready. The drive to Houston stretched on for 4 hours, though it felt much longer. The highway unspooled like a faded silver ribbon beneath the relentless Texas sun, my thoughts racing ahead of me. The key card Matthews had entrusted to me rested on the seat beside me, its chipped plastic catching the light every few minutes, as if winking mischievously, daring me to use it. As I crossed into the city limits, the Houston skyline emerged from a heat haze, a testament to glass and ambition. Somewhere amidst those towering structures, in a forgotten basement or a nondescript warehouse, the truth awaited, sealed inside a box marked 47C. The address Matthews had scribbled led me to a nondescript industrial building on the south side of the city, surrounded by a chain-link fence. A faded sign proclaimed it as the Federal Logistics Storage Facility. No guards, no cameras, just a keypad entry and an eerie sense that this place hadn't seen daylight in years. I swiped the key card, my heart pounding in my chest. The green light blinked and the lock clicked open, granting me access. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with a scent of cardboard and metal dust. Rows of shelves stretched into the shadows, each one stacked with identical gray boxes marked with code numbers. My footsteps echoed softly, the only sound in that cavernous space. Box 47C. I walked past 43, 44, 45, and 46, my anticipation building with each step. Finally, I reached 47. The box sat on a low shelf near the bottom. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled it free. She stared at it for what seemed like an eternity, her hands trembling. Where did you get this? It was part of a classified government record, a relocation file. You were taken from your real family when you were 6 years old. She shook her head, denial etched on her face.
No, that can't be.
I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Your real name is Emily Alden. Your father's a retired Marine general. He's been looking for you for nearly 20 years. Her breath hitched. That's impossible. I wish it were. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't remember any of that. You wouldn't. They erased it. But the pieces are still there. The nightmares, the flag, the uniforms. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes unfocused. Sometimes I see a man's face in my dreams, silver hair, blue eyes. He's always calling me Emmy. I thought I made it up. I swallowed hard, fighting back my own emotions. You didn't. We sat on a bench outside, overlooking the serene lake. The air was still, the water like glass. She stared at the horizon, her voice trembling. Why would anyone do that to a child? Power, I said simply. Your father uncovered something that threatened the wrong people. They couldn't touch him, so they took what he loved most. She turned to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. And you? How did you find me? I offered a faint smile. By refusing to stop. She gave a watery laugh. You sound like a Marine. I am. Then you know what it's like, she whispered. To lose people, and keep going anyway. Yes, I said softly. But you didn't just survive, Emily. You built a life. You helped people heal. That's strength they can't take away. She nodded slowly, tears now streaming freely down her face. I want to see him, she said. My father. I pulled out my phone. He'll be on the next flight. When General Alden arrived that evening, I waited near the lake while Lily stood on the dock, her hands clasped tightly together. Then find someone whose clearance is higher, I typed back. I hesitated before hitting send, but then I saw Lily's face in my mind, smiling, trusting, unaware of the world's cruelty. I hit enter. The next morning, I returned to the orphanage. I wasn't finished with St. Mary's, not yet. Sister Agnes was outside, tending to a small rose garden near the chapel. The smell of soil and lilies mixed with the faint scent of old paint and memory. Back so soon, she asked, straightening her back with a groan. I need to look through old storage, I said. Boxes, receipts, letters. Anything from 2006. She hesitated, then nodded. Follow me. The storage room was in the basement, where the air smelled of mildew and forgotten prayers. We walked between stacks of old toys, broken furniture, and boxes labeled with years. I found the one marked 2006 to 2007 and began digging. Inside, among yellowed papers and brittle folders, I found an envelope labeled Metropolitan Social Relief Program, Emergency Evacuation Order, stamped at the top corner with U.S. Department of Defense, Temporary Relief Initiative. The date matched the year Lily was transferred. I opened it carefully. Inside was a list of names, birth years, and approximate locations. Most were smudged or illegible, but one line was clear. Child ID 217L, FEMA relocation, guardian request pending. Next to it was a faint signature. The ink had bled, but I could still read part of it. Emma Matthews. The name meant nothing to me yet, but something about the handwriting felt military, precise, deliberate. Sister Agnes leaned over my shoulder. We never saw those papers, she said softly. They just showed up one day with the men who took her. The men? Yes. 2 of them, both in uniform. They said she was being transferred for her safety. I stared at the paper. Safety from what? She shook her head. They never said. That night, I sat in my car outside the orphanage, engine off, lights dimmed. It was heavier than I had anticipated. I set it on a nearby table, carefully peeled off the seal, and opened it. Inside were folders, hundreds of them. Files labeled with initials, dates, and locations. Disaster relief, refugee transfers, special custody cases. But one file stood out, thinner and newer than the rest, marked with a single red line across the top. ID 217L, FEMA relocation. I opened it cautiously, my fingers brushing against the brittle paper. The first page was a birth record, female, approximate age 6, no last name, found outside Waco, Texas, transferred to St. Mary's Orphanage. Subject exhibits signs of memory loss, possible trauma, the record stated. At the bottom, Under remarks was the chilling authorization: relocation to Houston foster system under Directive Hexops. I flipped through the remaining documents. A single photograph fell out, landing softly on the table. It was a picture of a little girl with curly brown hair and pale blue eyes, clutching a worn toy bear. I recognized that face instantly. Lily.
Emily.
The next document was even more unsettling: a psychological assessment stamped classified. It described the child as adaptable, high-functioning with stable temperament, as if she were a subject in a clinical study, not a missing person. Then came a list of names, agencies, handwritten notations. Transfer complete, case closed. And at the very end, stapled to the back, a signature I hadn't seen before, a signature that sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. Authorized by Harold Vance. I stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs.
Proof.
Tangible, undeniable proof. I quickly took photos of every page with my phone, then slipped the photo of Lily into my jacket pocket. The rest I left untouched, preserving the evidence. I closed the box and turned to leave when a sound stopped me in my tracks, the faint metallic click of a door latch. I spun around, my senses on high alert. He walked towards her, stiff at first, like a soldier confronting his own ghost. Emily, his voice cracked as he spoke the name. She turned. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other, years of pain, hope, and disbelief colliding in the silence between them. Then she ran to him. He caught her, holding her as if he feared she might vanish again. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, his metals glinting in the fading light. I looked everywhere, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Everywhere. I know, she sobbed, clinging to him. I think I always knew. I turned away, granting them their privacy. The sun dipped behind the trees, painting the water with streaks of gold. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, like the wind across a lake, reminding you that peace doesn't come from victory, but from truth. Later, as we stood by the car, Alden placed a hand on my shoulder. Major, I have no words. You don't need them, sir. He nodded, his eyes glistening. Vance is still in Washington, but I have everything we need now. Files, recordings, testimony. The truth's coming out. He smiled faintly. Then let me handle the politics. You've done enough, sir, I said quietly. I don't think any of us are done. Not yet. The wind carried the faint sound of father and daughter's laughter from behind us. For the first time in years, it sounded like healing. The following weeks unfolded like a surreal dream, part triumph, part reckoning. The headlines hit first. Undersecretary Harold Vance resigns amid federal probe. Then came the leaks, the internal memos, the classified transfers, the testimonies. I watched the news one night from the confines of my small on-base quarters, my coffee growing cold in my hand as the anchor spoke the words I'd waited 2 decades to hear. Vance is accused of authorizing the abduction and relocation of a minor, the daughter of then-Major General Robert Alden, in retaliation for an internal corruption investigation. The town was quiet, only the hum of cicadas and the occasional passing truck. My phone buzzed. A message from Elena. Got something. The relocation order, code 77HC, was processed through a defense logistics branch in Killeen, handled by Colonel M. Matthews, U.S. Army, retired 2010. Address attached. Proceed carefully. He's well connected. I stared at the screen. Colonel M. Matthews. That name felt like a locked door I'd just been handed the key to. I copied the address. Suburb of Georgetown, about an hour from the base. I should have waited for authorization, filed a report, gone through proper channels. But this wasn't an official mission. It was personal. And personal missions don't wait for permission. The next morning, I put on civilian clothes, jeans, a gray t-shirt, and my old leather jacket. The Texas heat was already rising by 0900. I parked across the street from a neat, single-story home with a manicured lawn and a U.S. flag fluttering from the porch, the kind of place that looked ordinary from the outside but carried ghosts inside its walls. Colonel Matthews answered the door himself. late 70s, trim, and still carried himself like a soldier. His handshake was firm but cold. "Major Collins, you said? I retired years ago. What's this about?" "Relocation orders," I said evenly. 2006, Texas region. A program that involved a little girl from Waco. He frowned, pretending to search his memory. "You'll have to be more specific." "Case ID 77HC, I said, watching his face. His pupils contracted, just a flicker, but enough. "Never heard of it," he replied, stepping back. "Now, if you'll excuse me." I blocked the door with my boot. "Sir, I'm not here to cause trouble, but I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." He glared at me, his jaw set. "You're out of line, Marine." "Maybe, but I buried too many truths in the name of following orders. Not this one." For a moment, I thought he might slam the door. Then his shoulders sagged. He motioned me inside. A man stood in the entrance, silhouetted by the sunlight streaming in from outside. Late 40s, neatly dressed in a suit, with a close-cropped haircut and a cold, calculating expression. "Major Collins," he said smoothly, his voice devoid of warmth. "You shouldn't be here." My hand instinctively went to my ID, but I quickly stopped myself.
Who are you?
He stepped forward, revealing a badge clipped to his belt. "Department of Defense Security. My name is Callahan. You accessed a restricted facility using an invalid key card." "Invalid?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Retired clearance. Belonged to Colonel Matthews, who, by the way, is now under federal review for unauthorized disclosures." I swallowed, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "You're with Vance, aren't you?" His lips twitched slightly, revealing a hint of a smile. "Let's just say I answer to people above your pay grade." He extended his hand, palm up. "Hand over the file." "Not going to happen." His eyes narrowed, his demeanor hardening. "You're making a mistake, Major. That file is sealed for a reason." "I know," I said, my voice low and steady. "Because it's evidence of a crime." He took a step closer, his presence threatening. "You think the system will side with you? You're one officer against the entire Pentagon. I've been outnumbered before." He sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "You Marines, always so noble, so willing to die for the truth, even when it buries you." Before he could reach me, I backed away toward the far wall, creating distance between us. My right hand hovered near my pocket, where my phone was silently recording every second. "Touch me, and this recording hits 10 inboxes before you can blink." He froze, his expression a mixture of anger and frustration. The corner of his mouth twitched, half a smirk, half irritation. "You don't understand what you've unleashed. Then explain it to me." But he didn't. For the first time, the nation heard what had been whispered in the shadows. For the first time, Emily's name, her real name, was spoken aloud, not as a missing child, but as a survivor. When I visited the Aldens' home a week later, the house felt lighter, filled with a sense of peace and hope. Photos adorned the mantel again, new ones. Emily and her father at the lake, smiling with the tentative joy of people relearning each other's faces. The general himself opened the door, his posture straighter, his eyes softer. "Major Collins," he said, his voice filled with warmth.
"Come in."
"There's someone waiting for you." Emily was sitting in the sunroom, sketching. When she saw me, she stood quickly, setting the notebook aside. "You really came." "I promised," I said, smiling. She laughed, a sound that hadn't existed the first time I met her by that lake. "You know, every night since, I've tried to remember more. And sometimes I do. Pieces. The smell of the base, the sound of engines, my mother's voice. It's like the world is giving them back to me, one by one." "That's how healing works," I said quietly. "Memory doesn't return all at once. It rebuilds itself, like muscle after a wound." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I still can't believe anyone would go to all that trouble to hide me." I looked towards the general. Power has always feared innocence, but it underestimated Marines.
He chuckled at that.
"It usually does." A month later, I was called to D.C. to testify before a Senate committee. The hearing room was packed with press and officials pretending not to be nervous. I sat in uniform, my ribbons sharp against the dark blue fabric, as senators asked their questions. Major Collins, one of them said, "Why did you continue investigating after your superior officers told you to stand down?" I met his gaze, unwavering. Because a little girl's life mattered more than my career. The room fell silent. Somewhere behind me, a Marine guard subtly shifted his stance. The living room smelled faintly of cigar smoke and lemon polish. On the wall hung framed commendations, photos of a younger Matthews with generals and senators. He poured himself a drink, his hands trembling just enough for me to notice. "That file should have stayed buried," he muttered. "So, it exists," I said quietly. He looked at me over the rim of his glass. "You're chasing something that will break a lot of people if you dig too deep. Was it your idea to move her?"
He sighed. No.
Orders came from above. Said it was for national security. National security? I almost laughed. She was a child. Matthews's eyes hardened. Not my decision. My job was to follow through. Whose decision then? He hesitated. The request came through a classified channel marked with an old defense seal, the Office of Strategic Infrastructure. You'll find nothing online. They made sure of that. He refilled his glass and said, almost to himself, "That girl. She looked scared when they took her. Kept asking for someone named Tessa." I froze. That was me. He turned towards me, eyes narrowing. "Then you already know too much." Before I could respond, he took a long drink, set the glass down, and whispered, "Be careful who you serve, Major. Some commands come from men who've forgotten what honor means." I left his house with my pulse hammering. The sun outside burned my skin, but inside, I was ice cold. I had my first lead and my first enemy. By the time I got back to the base, the Texas sky had turned the color of gunmetal. The air was thick, restless, carrying the smell of rain. I parked near the hangars, sat in my car for a moment, and let the engine tick down to silence. My mind was louder than the thunder forming over the horizon. Colonel Matthews's words kept echoing. Some commands come from men who've forgotten what honor means. That was a warning, and I knew it. In the Marines, warnings like that don't come from fear. They come from guilt. He simply turned and walked out the door, slamming it shut behind him. I stood there in the silence, my pulse pounding in my ears. Whatever this was, I had just stepped into a war that no one wanted to admit existed. I drove straight to a quiet diner on the outskirts of town, parking in a spot where I could keep a watchful eye on the highway. I quickly transferred every photo from my phone to the cloud, ensuring the evidence was secure. I sent copies to Captain Brooks and another to a private, encrypted drive I used on deployments. Then, I ordered a cup of black coffee and sat there, lost in thought. Vance's authorization, Matthews's fear, Callahan's warning. It all pointed to a network of secret relocations operating under the guise of national security. But Emily wasn't a spy or a witness. She was a child, a pawn in a much larger game. My phone buzzed again, interrupting my thoughts. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Collins," I answered cautiously. "Major, this is Detective Ramos, Houston PD. Captain Brooks gave me your contact information." His voice was rough, steady, the voice of someone who had seen too much. "She said you might need a pair of eyes down here." "I do," I replied. "How do you feel about digging up old ghosts?" He chuckled dryly. "I work homicide. That's half my job." I gave him a brief overview of the case. The missing girl, the file, the federal interference. He didn't flinch, his composure unwavering. "I can pull the orphanage closure reports from that year," he offered. "Maybe we'll find a name that slipped through the cracks." "Thank you, Detective." "I appreciate it." "One thing, Major," he added, his tone serious. "If you're right about this, and this Vance character really has that kind of reach, don't go anywhere alone." I glanced at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Callahan's car tailing me. Nothing but trucks and the harsh glare of the afternoon sun. "I'll be fine," I said, trying to sound confident.
Respect.
Another senator leaned forward. "Would you do it again?" In a heartbeat, I said, "Because justice doesn't serve the system. It serves people. When it was over, I stepped outside into the bright spring air. The Capitol dome gleamed like something reborn. I looked up and whispered, Semper Fidelis, always faithful, not just to command, but to conscience. The following evening, I received an unexpected package with no return address. Inside was a single envelope and a folded note. The note read, For Major Collins, you reminded me that truth has a cost, but also a purpose. Inside the envelope was a silver pendant, the kind issued to children at St. Mary's Orphanage long ago, with the initials A2006 engraved on the back. Emily's initials. I smiled. Maybe she'd found it among her things, or maybe she just wanted me to have something to remember this by. Either way, it felt like a full circle. Weeks turned into months. The investigation widened, and Vance's allies fell one by one. Each indictment was another small victory for those who still believed that honor could outlive politics. I returned to duty, but requested reassignment. Paperwork and command desks no longer suited me. I transferred to a Veterans Outreach Division, helping young Marines transition back home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Every now and then, I'd receive a letter from Emily, or rather, Lily Emily Carter Alden, as she now signed her name. She'd stayed in Louisiana for a while, working at the hospital, but was planning to start nursing school. Her last letter ended with the words, You once told me truth deserves daylight, even if it burns. I think you were right. But sunlight also heals. I kept that one pinned above my desk. One summer evening, General Alden invited me back to Texas. The airfield shimmered in the heat as I stepped out of the car. He was waiting by the hangar, wearing civilian clothes for once, looking 10 years younger. I opened my laptop and began cross-referencing everything. Matthew's service years, the FEMA relocation program, the Defense Logistics Division. Buried deep in an old database, I found a memo tagged Confidential, Infrastructure Recovery Operations, July 2006. The signature line read, Matthews, Colonel, DLD. Underneath, 3 initials caught my eye. HV. I didn't need to guess who that was. My father had spoken the name before he died. Harold Vance, now a powerful Undersecretary of Defense, once a major stationed right here in Texas. He and Alden had served together early in their careers, but their paths had diverged sharply. Alden taking the moral route, Vance the political one. If Matthews had been taking orders from Vance, this went far beyond a misplaced orphan file. I picked up the phone and called General Alden. Sir, it's Collins. You found something? His tone was steady but tight, like a wire pulled too taut. Yes, sir. A Colonel Matthews handled a 2006 relocation order. He claims it came from an upper channel, something called strategic infrastructure. Silence then. Harold Vance. A long pause. You knew. I suspected, sir. He's still in Washington. You think he'd risk exposure now? Men like Vance don't see risk, Alden said grimly. They see leverage. He exhaled slowly. Listen, Major, this stops being an inspection now. This is intelligence. You tread carefully. I'll reopen my daughter's case quietly through personal channels. Yes, sir. After the call ended, I stared at the phone in my hand. Intelligence. That word changed everything, because in my world, intelligence meant shadows, power, and the kind of secrets that swallowed people whole. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain hit the barracks roof like gravel. I couldn't sleep, so I opened the old folder again. There, beneath the paperwork from St. Mary's, was something I hadn't noticed before, an envelope wedged between the pages, unmarked. Every soldier says that, Ramos replied, his voice laced with cynicism. And every ghost does, too. That night, I checked into a cheap motel outside Katy, a small town on the outskirts of Houston. I didn't trust base lodging, not after the break-in at the facility. The sheets smelled faintly of detergent and dust. The air conditioner rattled incessantly, but the room offered anonymity. I set the photo of Lily on the nightstand and stared at it for a long time, my heart aching for the innocent child. The smile, the curls, the trusting eyes. What kind of monster steals that away from a child? Outside, The hum of the highway blended with the soft rumble of thunder in the distance. I thought about the general, about the day he would finally learn that his daughter wasn't dead, just hidden, and about the look in his eyes when he finally saw her again. If she was still alive, I vowed I would find her. And if the man who took her was still breathing, well, that would be a different kind of justice. I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and whispered into the quiet, "Hold on, Lily. I'm coming." By morning, I had memorized every document, I had photographed every name, every code. I could still see that red line stamped across the file, authorized by Harold Vance. It burned in my mind like an open wound, fueling my determination. The motel coffee was weak and bitter, but it served its purpose, keeping me alert and focused. Detective Ramos met me in the parking lot, a tall, imposing figure in a plain brown jacket, his posture reflecting years of experience on the streets. "Major Collins," he said, extending his hand in a firm handshake.
"You've stirred up a hornet's nest."
I offered a small, weary smile. "Story of my life." He opened a folder, revealing the fruits of his labor. "I went through the archives you mentioned. St. Mary's was part of a foster system audit in 2007. 6 kids were listed as transferred to Houston, but only 5 arrived. Emily's inside," he said. "She wanted to show you something." Inside the hangar sat a restored training aircraft, its metal gleaming under the lights. On the side, painted in neat script, were 3 words: "Honor line for Sarah." I froze, overcome with emotion. "She wanted to name it after what she calls the line that connects all of us," the general said quietly. "The line between duty and mercy, between truth and power." Emily climbed down from the cockpit, grinning. "We're calling it the Honor Line Project. Dad's helping me get veterans involved in aviation rehab therapy. You helped us both find something worth building again." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Then, I simply hugged her, a simple human gesture that conveyed everything words could not. That night, as I drove back to base, I pulled over near the old memorial wall. The stars were bright above the Texas sky, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted by ghosts. I thought of Matthews, of Brooks, of Ramos, and of everyone who'd risked something to make truth matter. I thought of Emily's laughter by the lake. And I realized that revenge had never been the point. It had only been the spark that lit the path towards redemption. Justice didn't look like vengeance. It looked like a father holding his daughter again. It looked like a survivor choosing to forgive a world that had forgotten her. And for me, it looked like peace. If you've listened this far, if you've walked with me through the storms, the silence, and the truth, then maybe you know what I've learned. We can't always undo what's been broken. But we can stand for what's right, even when no one's watching, even when it costs us. Because sometimes the smallest act, opening a box, asking a question, refusing to look away, can bring light to places that have been dark for too long. So, wherever you are tonight, remember this. Honor isn't about the medals we wear, it's about the promises we keep. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed letterhead, Department of Defense, Emergency Operations Division. It was a memo addressed to Colonel Matthews. Subject: Reassignment of Minor, ID 217L. Directive: Proceed under civilian cover. No further record to be maintained. Authorization code: Hexops. No name, no signature, just those initials again. I felt the hair rise on my neck. Whoever HV was, he had the power to make a child vanish without a trace, and the arrogance to sign it like a stamp of ownership. I scanned the document and encrypted it on a flash drive. Then I did something reckless. I called Captain Elena Brooks again. "Elena, I need a favor." "You already got one," she said dryly. "What is this really about, Sarah? A child? A missing girl?" A cover-up tied to a defense project from 2006. One name was missing from the log: Lily Carter. I exhaled slowly, confirmation washing over me. That's her. That's Emily Alden. Ramos nodded grimly. Here's the kicker. The transfer was signed by a deputy coordinator named Harold Vance. It was an internal document, never meant for public record. So, he used his military credentials to move a child off the grid. Ramos paused, his expression hardening, and then erased her. We drove to Matthews's house that afternoon, a sense of foreboding hanging heavy in the air. The front blinds were drawn tight, obscuring the interior from view. There was no sign of movement. I knocked twice, my knuckles rapping against the solid wood. No answer. I knocked a third time more forcefully. The door creaked open a few inches, revealing a sliver of darkness. "Colonel Matthews?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. Silence. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes that truth still matters. Subscribe, stay with us, and keep the honor line alive. Because some stories don't end. They just come home.